Police Minister Senzo Mchunu says criminals who shoot at police will be met with the full might of the law. This comes after 8 alleged cash-in-transit robbers were shot and killed by police and 5 other suspects were arrested in Khayelitsha on the Cape Flats on Monday. Police say the suspects opened fire on the officers when they were approached. Police retaliated, killing 8 of the suspects. 7 AK-47 rifles, 2 R5 rifles, 1 R4 rifle, a dashprod rifle, 2 pistols and 3 explosive charges were found in the possession of the suspects. To look at gun proliferation in South Africa, we are now joined on the line by a researcher at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, Jenni Irish-Qhobosheane. And it's always a pleasure speaking to you, Jenni. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I mean, I read that list of the weapons that were seized and found. I mean, this is insane. 7 AK-47s, 2 R5 rifles, 1 R4 rifle, dashpod pro rifle, pistols, explosive charges. How are normal or criminals getting their hands on these kinds of weapons?
You know, I think that there are a number of sources of illicit firearms in this country. Historically, if you look at in the past, most of our legal firearms would have come from the conflict that arose during apartheid, and as well as from weapons coming in from neighboring states across our borders from conflicts in those states. But I think what we're seeing increasingly now is, while there is still some cross-border trafficking in firearms, what we're seeing is that there's a growing domestic market where illicit firearms are being sourced. And we would identify like 3 main sources of that domestic market. The first is civilians who have licensed firearms, who lose those firearms either during crimes or through negligence. And then the more concerning for us is where you have police and army firearms landing up in criminal hands, as well as firearms from other state departments that land up in criminals' hands.
Yeah. How do you get the army's weapons and the police's weapons handing up in criminals' hands? Is it inside jobs, or is it, just help us understand that?
I mean, there've been 1 or 2 isolated instances where police stations have been attacked and the weapons have been stolen. But in most instances, this would be done with the collusion of people within the police and army and other state departments in actually enabling people to access those weapons.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at some of the statistics that are out here and saying that around 23 guns are lost or stolen every single day. I mean, how is this possible? And these are just some of the stats that have come out when they're talking about calls for intervention. 23 guns stolen or lost every day in this country.
Yeah, I mean, those predominantly would be those recorded lost and stolen. So the figure is probably substantially higher, because very often when firearms go missing, for example, from police station, evidence stores or whatever, they don't necessarily get found until, so if you take Norwood Police Station, for example, where 173 firearms went missing from their stores. Those firearms were only discovered because an investigator was investigating a shooting of a police officer and traced the gun back to a gun that should have been in the Norwood stores. And then on further investigation, it was found that it was 173 firearms that had gone missing. So very often when it comes to firearms going missing from, for example, state departments, very often those departments don't even report the losses and theft of those weapons.
Yeah, the losses and theft, or perhaps the sale. And that I need to ask you, because
absolutely,
this is where we come back to. I mean, 173 firearms from a police station don't just go missing. They don't become invisible and walk out the door. Somebody is perhaps doing this inside, and this is the problem. This is a major problem when, you are supplying guns, whether it be to army personnel, whether it be to police personnel, to protect the citizens of the country, and then they are selling them to the criminals. Who really is protecting us? And that's the question I need answered. I'm sure most South Africans need answered.
No, absolutely. And I think that the Prinsloo case just highlighted where Colonel Prinsloo, who was one of the key people in the South African Police Service who was responsible for controlling significant amounts of weapons and armories in the country, and his involvement in siphoning weapons from those armories into the hands of gangs, for example, in the Western Cape, is a clear example of these kinds of actions. My concern is that when we look at cases like the Norwood case, this is not the first time Norwood has been implicated, not necessarily the police station, but the area. In a couple of years before that, a home was raided in Norwood, and a significant number of firearms were discovered at that home, and many of those firearms were traced back to government store to firearms that should have been destroyed after the amnesty process, and firearms coming from government stores. So it's clear that this practice is happening on quite a wide scale. And my concern is that it's not good enough to say, well, the station commissioner will resign. We need to get to the bottom and there need to be much greater consequences for people involved in state departments that are involved in siphoning off weapons and handing those weapons over to criminals.
And that's where the key is, because at the end of the day, you need to find the source and the origin of all of this, because, you know, you can say we want to bring about stricter gun control. I mean, any law-abiding citizen that wants to apply for a gun license has to buy a gun. I mean, they're very strict rules and tests that are done for that person to qualify to get that. And yet, there are just so many illegal weapons that are around. So we can't necessarily look at tightening the law, but it's the enforcement of the law where it seems to be a problem. So what do we do? I mean, what do you suggest that as a country we do?
You know, I think that at the moment we see, if you look at SABC's annual report every year, they are seizing a significant number of illicit firearms, and that's great. But at the same time, are we tracing back where those firearms are coming from?
Yeah.
Are we actually having very comprehensive approaches to every time a firearm is seized, tracing it back to its origin, and then having some sort of consequences for where those firearms came from? And then I think there also are a number of areas where we could strengthen those controls. For example, if one looks at firearms in the hands of state departments outside of the police and army, where you find a situation where other government departments and state entities combinedly possess more firearms than the police and army combined. And very often those firearms, we don't know what government departments those firearms are in. How many does each of those government departments and entities possess? How many were lost and stolen every year? Yes, there is a small section in the police's report where they talk about loss and theft from other government entities, but clearly the figures that they are giving us are not completely accurate, because those government departments are not reporting those losses and thefts to the police. So I think one of the first steps we need to do is understand who in state departments possess what firearms. How many of those, and proper audits to look at how many of those firearms are getting lost and stolen every year, and what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, it's almost hard to believe how you're speaking about other government departments having more guns and weapons than the police and the army altogether. I mean, why would other government departments need these weapons? For what reason?
That for me is a key question. That for me would be a key question. Obviously, if you're looking at the Metro Police, one could understand, but we need to understand. But we need to understand how many of their weapons are going lost and stolen. But in other government departments, that's exactly the question. How do we have a situation where other government departments and entities possess more weapons than the police and army? And
you know,
when we were doing a report on illicit firearms, we requested from 5 different government departments and entities how many firearms they possessed and how many had been lost and stolen over the last 5 years. Only one government department was able to provide us with answers to that question. That is astounding.
And which government department was that, as a matter of interest?
That was the Department of Justice,
Okay.
which had really a relatively small number of firearms.
Okay, okay. And when you look basically at South Africa, certainly according to the latest crime statistics, guns are the weapon of choice to murder people. I mean, it's clear, it's blatant. I mean, when you look at the numbers that have come out from stats, 6,945 murders recorded during the period, where 3,106 of them were due to firearm, and then it breaks it down. And this is from the 1st of July to the 30th of September. These are crime stats I'm reading from last year. And I mean, you know, per province, it looks like Gauteng is the most, and then of course it goes down. But, you know, this is in terms of the amount of people that are killed every single day by firearms. What are we looking at?
Yeah, no, I think we definitely are looking at, I mean, we don't have exact figures for the extent of the pool of illicit firearms, obviously. But, I mean, some people have put it as high as 2.4 million firearms in circulation in that illicit pool. And that is a major, major concern, because so many of the crimes, be they petty or be they highly organized, are being committed with these illicit firearms. And it's not only the firearms we should be concerned about, but also people's access to ammunition.
Yeah.
So we need to look at the ways in which people are accessing ammunition for those firearms, and not just the firearm, but also the negligence around ammunition.
Yeah, I mean, we see these visuals coming through. I mean, we saw the latest with the story in the little school where Pastor Mboro was there, and he was holding a panga. The gentleman with him had a big shotgun. This incident, figures stating 34 people are shot every single day and killed in South Africa with these kind of guns. It's a very big problem, and perhaps one of our biggest issues that needs to be dealt with, and very, very seriously here in South Africa. But my final closing to you, we've been hearing from the police minister himself, and the minister has been very, very harsh in saying that the police will shoot if they are needing to. They'll use the full might of the law on their side. Is this kind of talk a good thing or a bad thing, do you think?
You know, I think we need to recognize that there are different types of situations that the police find themselves in. And certainly when one is confronting heavily armed, for example, cash and transit heist gangs, those gangs are highly armed, militaristic, and prepared to shoot back. And one cannot really argue that the police must take a very soft approach to criminal gangs like that. So I think it really does depend. If the police's lives are under threat and they are faced with heavily armed criminal gangs such as cash and transit heist gangs, I think you are going to see shootouts happening, because that's the nature of how these cash and transit heist gangs operate.
All right, we leave it there. Jenni, thank you. Thank you very, very much for talking to us. Jenni Irish-Qhobosheane is a researcher at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime.